31-year-old man who admitted to killing victims in his apartment, then dismembering their bodies, may have murdered up to 17 people.
A serial killer is on the loose in the Daytona area.
Investigators are on the trail of a possible serial killer.
A stunning claim from an accused killer awaiting trial in Pennsylvania.
And authorities believe they could very well have a serial killer in custody.
And they say it may be the work of a serial killer.
An accused serial killer.
Welcome to another established episode of 5 Minutes of Murder, the segment where I, Daddy Longlegs, takes you on a wild adventure through the mind of a serial killer. On this segment, we bring it a little bit back closer to home, and we look at Philadelphia's own Gary Hidenick, who was a serial killer, a cannibal who kidnapped, tortured, raped, and murdered at least 6 women. So unwrap that delicious cheesesteak and come close, real close to the monitor, as we jump on into the mind of this Philadelphia monster. Gary Michael Hidenick was born to Michael and Ellen Hidenick on November 22nd, 1943 in Eastlake, Ohio. Gary's father was abusive, which caused him to become a lifelong bedwetter. This problem was further compounded because his father used to make Gary hang his stained sheets from his bedroom window in full glory for all the neighborhood to see. At school, Gary did not interact with his fellow students, especially the females. When a new female student asked him, did he finish his homework, Gary yelled at her and told her she was not worthy enough to even talk to him. In high school, regardless of his introverted personality, Gary tested at 148 in an IQ test, which classified him as a genius in the top 1% of the country. Still, this didn't stop him from dropping out of high school at the age of 17 to enlist into the United States Army. Gary served in the Army for 13 months and trained to be a medic in San Antonio, Texas. Ultimately, he transferred to a 46th Army Surgical Hospital in Langlust, West Germany, where he stayed until August 1962, where Gary reported being sick. He was complaining of severe headaches, dizziness, blurred vision, and nausea. It was at this time he was diagnosed with a mental illness, primarily schizophrenic disorder, which he basically was then prescribed a drug called trifluoperazine. And then he was honorably discharged from the military service right after that. Shortly after his discharge, he moved around a little bit, but he ended up going to Philadelphia, where he became a licensed practicing nurse, and he enrolled in the University of Philadelphia. It was there between 1975 and 1986 Gary would attempt suicide at least 13 times. Then he incorporated a church called the United Church Ministers of God, which he was the self-proclaimed bishop of. It was a very small church. It only had 5 followers, but he had a good knowledge of the stock market. And with this knowledge, he was able to take donations and amass over $500,000 in the church's name. During that time, he also married his soon-to-be wife, Betty Distro, in 1985. But the marriage was short-lived as Betty soon divorced him, basically chiming into being raped a lot. Spousal rape, she called it. By January 1987, Gary had kidnapped a total of 4 women: Josephine Nicole Riviera, Sandra Lindsay, Lisa Thomas, and Deborah Dooley, all of which he held captive in this nice little pit in his basement, chained up in the basement of his house, where he'd basically regularly go downstairs and beat and rape and torture them.
And he started choking me, but all I could remember was, I don't know, I guess it happened so fast, all I could remember was like a film projector of things that were going on in my life was like, just flipping back. When I came to, he had a handcuff on my arm, on my wrist, and he kept saying, shut up, keep still, I ain't gonna hurt you, I'm not gonna hurt you. Then he took muffler clamps and put the muffler clamps around my ankles with this chain, and then he used crazy glue to hold the nuts on, and he dried it with a hairdryer.
One of the women, Sandra Lindsay, died of a combination of starvation, torture, and an unrelated fever. Basically, he didn't check up on these girls at all until he went down to fuck them. Gary dismembered her body, putting her arms and legs in the freezer, and then marking them dog food. He basically thought of them as being pets or their dogs. So, in any case, he then cooked her ribs in the oven and broiled her head in a pot on the stove. Police came to the house due to the complaints by the neighbors of a really, really bad odor. But Gary explained, he basically said, I fell asleep. I was cooking a roast and I fell asleep and burned it. I'm sorry. Police soon left.
I dismembered the body and I started burning it on the stove and in the oven and stuff, and that was when you got the big smell.
Some of the leftover flesh of Lindsay was basically ground up then by Gary, and he mixed it into dog food on bread, which he fed to the other captive girls. Gary would also enlighten them by using an electric shock as a form of torture. He would take this hole in the basement floor and then fill it with water. And then from there, he would actually have one of the other girls apply an electric current to it by using a stripped extension cord, attaching those to the women's chains, shocking them. Then on March 19, 1987, it went too far as Deborah Dudley was fatally electrocuted to death. Her body was disposed of in the New Jersey Pine Barrens. On March 23, 1987, Gary and Riviera went out to replace Dudley and abduct Angus Adams. That next day, Riviera convinced Gary to let her go temporarily in order to visit one of her family members. He drove her to a local gas station, and he dropped her off, and he said he would wait there for her. She walked 1 block away and found a payphone, and then called 911 and told them the entire story. Completely baffled police converged on the situation, converged on the gas station where Gary was waiting, and on March 24th, 1987, Gary Hidenick was finally arrested. That was it. He was in complete police custody, and that's it. Once being told what was going on, police and detectives were dispatched to Gary's home, where they literally found what they described as a house of horrors, something that you would see out of a monster movie or a horror movie or in an amusement park. Awful, awful stuff.
We found some what we believe to be human extremities, arms, possibly a knee. We're not exactly sure. That has to be analyzed and looked at.
Where the windows were, he put some insulation, and he put some of the bags of dirt so you couldn't hear too much down there. So he virtually tried to soundproof the basement from the girls' screams and everything.
Now, while this was going on at Gary's arraignment, he would claim that the women were already in the house when he moved in. I wish, strange, bizarre. Gary's lawyer, Charles Pernod Jr., attempted to argue that Gary was basically insane, illegally insane. But the court knew of the money that he earned for the church, and he knew that the money he was able to do with the stock market, and they knew he wasn't insane. They knew he was quite intelligent at that point. While the hearing was going on, however, in April 1987, Gary again attempted to hang himself in his jail cell, but was completely unsuccessful. Then, on July 1st, 1988, Gary Hidenick was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. He was then transferred and incarcerated to the State Correctional Institution of Pittsburgh, where, January 1989, once again, Gary attempted suicide with an overdose of Thorazine. Once again, proving to be the giant loser he was completely unsuccessful. He was then transferred to the State Correctional Institution of Rockville Center in Center County, Pennsylvania, where he would await until July 6, 1999, where Gary Hidenick was finally executed by lethal injection. His body was then cremated, which is kind of surprising that he was, oddly enough, the last person in Pennsylvania state history to be executed since. Now, the other strange thing is Gary's House of Horrors still stands in Philadelphia. If you'd like to visit it, you can. It's actually located at 3520 North Marshall Street, Philadelphia, PA 19140. Put that in your GPS, you'll find it. So there you have it, folks. Philadelphia's own Gary Hidenick, a serial rapist, a cannibal, an ordained minister, pope, and a murderer. Can't say we're going to miss him anytime soon, but yeah, definitely an interesting gentleman. Well, there you have it, kids. We're wrapping it up. Another episode of 5 Minutes of Murder. We hope you had some eye-opening entertainment with this one, and maybe you learned a few things to boot. Oh, and you know what? Always remember, kids, to lock your doors and windows, because you never know when your 5 minutes are going to be up. Peace.